Welcome everyone. My name's Damien Short from the University of London, so I'm your chair for this final session. So the title for today is the Plenary Round Table. It's the local struggles for human rights policy and action-oriented perspectives. So we'll kick off with a Skype presentation. It's Francesco Martone from the Difesa Network in Italy, and he'll be talking about strategies and tools for human rights defenders' protection and support, the case of the Italian CSO Network. So I'll be asking the speakers for 30 minutes maximum. Some have already told me they'll be speaking for much less than that, so we should have more time for discussion. And I will leave the speakers introduce themselves to an extent, because unfortunately my pronunciation will make a mockery of their bios, I'm afraid. So, Francesco, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. And please accept my apologies for not being able to be there in person. But I was really looking forward to participate physically in that discussion, considering also the particular importance of the site. I mean, the importance and the relevance of the work of the University of Padua, particularly, but also the fact that Padua is now a testing table. It's a space where there is an experiment going on to try and set up a shelter city program along the lines of what has been already done and is being done, for instance, in the Netherlands and in other countries. So my contribution to this discussion is actually inspired also by current practice, especially in Padua, but also in other Italian municipalities. I am the spokesperson of this Italian network called Difesa D that was set up exactly 2 years ago, when we organized an international conference on human rights defenders in the Italian Chamber of Deputies that then resulted in the adoption of a parliamentary resolution on human rights defenders that paved the way of more active advocacy of the Italian CSO network together with the Italian government in Italian parliament. But I will delve into some specific details further down. This conversation is actually happening also in a very important particular historical moment. We are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Italy, in particular, is currently chairing the OSCE that has made of human rights one of the particular pillars of its action, and has recently been elected for a 3-year rotation seat at the UN Human Rights Council. So these are all coincidences and conjunctures, spatial and temporary conjunctures that actually characterize also the conversation and the work we'll be doing at the moment. What is happening internationally? I guess you've been already having some inputs from preceding rapporteurs and preceding speakers about the dire situation of human rights offenders worldwide and the increasing shrinking of civic space at global level. I was just reading right now a report published by Civicus right today that is actually detailing the state of the civic space worldwide. And there are some particular trends. One is indeed the expansion of the extractivist frontier that is actually taking its toll in terms of attacks and intimidation of environmental rights defenders. And on the other is indeed the rise of xenophobic and racist and right-wing parties and political governments that is currently shrinking space also at the European Union level. It is therefore very important to us to have a clear analysis, a clear political analysis of what are the factors that today are generating this wave of repression and this wave of criminalization. Who defends against who is defending human rights? The key issue here is about the progressive securitization of the public space that goes hand in hand with the privatization of the public sector. If you look at the governance structure of traditional liberal democracy, it builds up on the balance between 3 different actors, the so-called triad: market, state, and civil society. What we are looking at now is a progressive shrinking of the civil society space to the advantage of state or to the advantage of market. And this is an imbalance that we need to take into due account, because when we talk about human rights defenders, and in particular, this element was made very clear at the UN Human Rights Conference held in Paris a few weeks ago, we need to tackle the root causes of attacks to human rights offenders. And at the same time, we need to figure out the reason why all the multiplication of activities at the international and regional levels is actually not resulting in a decrease in the number of attacks and in the widening of the repression toward at the global level. We have been actually trying to found our work around these assumptions and around an innovative approach to human rights defenders. Indeed, one point is that the same concept of HRD, of human rights offenders, needs to be spelled out and revisited. It's a concept that does not necessarily take into due account the existing imbalances within the same category. For instance, the asymmetries of power and of access to information and to advocacy and decision making between, for instance, an urban-based NGO working on human rights and an indigenous community, some lost somewhere in the Amazon that is suffering the impacts of extractive activities and of the ensuing repression. So we need to take these asymmetries into due account and try to decolonize a bit the concept of human rights and human rights offenders. Further, we realize that much of the activities carrying on at this stage and globally are meant to intervene in the moment of risk, in the moment where the attack or the situation of risk has already concretized, and there needs to be some more and more urgent work done on one hand to prevent attacks, and on the others to have a broader concept of who is a human rights offender in terms of community, in terms of social movement, and not necessarily as a traditionally meant civil society organization. So this is one point that for us, for the network, and also for the work we try to do at the local level, is very fundamental. How to regain the centrality of the agency of political and social actors, and how to make sure that these are put at the center of any initiative that actually is meant to create links, solidarity, and common platforms between us and them. The second element, so one is about colonizing the approach, recognizing the agency. Third is to acknowledge that the complexity of the structural causes of attacks to human rights and human rights defenders are multi-level. I mean, they're multiple, and that would require a sort of a multi-level approach, also in terms of advocacy, in terms of protective measures. For instance, one of the elements that to us is very important is not to single out the role of cities within a broader advocacy context. So we see the work that cities can do very tightly connected to the other levels. I mean, the UN level of the national government or Ministry of Foreign Affairs level, so that there is a sort of a synergy, but also sort of a feedback loop. For instance, you have a city or a municipality and all the actors that actually populate that territorial space that work on a human rights cause or adopt a territory or adopt a human rights movement or a defender, and that would actually create a sort of synergy with the work that we do at the national level in terms of advocacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Italian embassies abroad on the one hand, but then how we can bring also the ensuing, let's say, concern coming from cities and territories at the upper level in the UN Human Rights Council. So the need for a holistic approach and a multi-level approach that is part also of the current governance structure. So we see it as a very complex and multidisciplinary strategy, whereas, for instance, the work we do is based on various pillars. The first pillar, indeed, has been to consolidate the work of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ensure that the diplomatic corps fully grasps, understands, and owns, for instance, existing instruments such as the EU guidelines on human rights offenders, and then opening up a space of conversation and exchange the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially on particular regions like Latin America. That resulted in a very important conference organized by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in June, the International Workshop and Conference on the Best Practices for HRD Protection, that was also inserted as part of the Italian OECC presidency. At this stage, what we can notice is that the work we've been doing, not only centrally here in Rome, but the all different levels of pressure and of advocacy coming national level, also from initiatives that are being carried out in Padua, in Trento, or elsewhere, in Milan, has resulted in a very important development. Human rights defenders issue has never been on the radar screen of the Italian Foreign Affairs. It is now a state policy. So now Italy is considering HRD's issue as a key determinant of its own projection abroad. And this has been the evidence of this is that one of the pledges that Italy carried forward for its application, the UN Human Rights Council, was actually HRDs. And this is a part now of its presence in Geneva. Indeed, the other point I wanted to make sure to stress is that we can't think about protecting human rights defenders abroad if we don't take into account also what is the situation in our country. So if you look at, for instance, how the concept of human rights offenders can be spelled out in Italy and in the situation that Italian civil society is experiencing, especially with reference to the criminalization of solidarity, then you see that there is another connection, the local, global, and the national, international, that comes up very clearly, very neatly. The second pillar that we're working on is about addressing the root causes. Indeed, as I said before, one of the causes of expansion of the attacks to human rights defenders, in particular environmental defenders and defenders of the land, is about expansion of agribusiness of the private sector. So we're working now with the Italian Interministerial Committee on Human Rights that recently, just yesterday, presented midterm review of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in Geneva to introduce very stringent elements on human rights defenders also in the National Action Plan. Thirdly, and that we come up with the core of my input here, is a work on the role of the local authorities, especially in terms of establishing a national pilot program and a network of shelter cities. We said, as I said before, while our concept of shelter cities is broad, it takes into account all these elements, the connection between the work done at the local level. And by local level, again, I mean not only the local authority, but also all the different civil actors, social actors that actually populate the space, including the universities, including NGOs and other organizations. I was, for instance, in Verona last week, and it's a very interesting initiative going on by not only by the University of Verona, but also by the Lawyers Guild that has recently joined our network. So we want to make sure that the local level is also spelled out in such a way that that can grasp its national and international connections. And particularly for that, one element that we think is very important is to ensure that any kind of action undertaken at the local level that imply also the possibility of a relocation is conceived in a much broader strategy that is of ensuring that territories and local authorities and civil society organizations in a particular city have a very strong connection with social movements, civil society organizations, and human rights offenders in some given areas that are determined by their own vocation. For instance, if Padua expresses a vocation to work together with danger lawyers, then Padua will be the focal point for the relocation program for endangered lawyers at the national level, and so on and so forth. As I said, we mean relocation as a last resort. We don't want to offer to give the impression that relocation is a subtraction of agency, but it has to be meant as a specific emergency step within a broader strategy of consolidating people-to-people relations and strengthening agency of the local organizations and movements that are actually under risk. So this means that we want to really make sure that there are some very clear principles that underline the work we do on relocation and shelter cities that is part of this innovative approach, whereas cities in Italy can actually work on human rights offenders. What I would like to say is we are working on fertile ground. Italian municipalities have always been engaged. I can imagine, for instance, the enti locali per la pace that have been playing a very important role in the peace march Perugia Assisi and still do. I think about, for instance, the Recosol, the network of solidarity municipalities in Italy that is actually working a lot to welcome and assist migrants and refugees and putting the issue of the respect of human rights of migrants at the core of its action. So we are basically building up on this long time awareness of Italian municipalities of how their contribution and their action can have also national, international, say, implications. What we would like, so basically, this is somehow the concept and how we see the role of cities in the broader challenge of human rights defenders and human rights promotion and protection at the global level. Lastly, what I would like also to stress is that we need to somehow change our vision. I mean, when we read about the increased volume of repression, the increasing number of defenders that are being threatened, I mean, the sense, the immediate feeling would be that of feeling disempowered. I do think that actually these figures clearly stand out for our very vitalized capacity of civil society and of social movements to try and take control or regain public space. So it's not a matter of pessimism, I think, but it's a matter of acknowledging there is a very vibrant international civil society, that there are very vibrant and active and determined social movements, indigenous organizations, trade unions, that internationally and globally are still trying to keep control of the public space and to transform that public space in a more democratic and bottom-up manner. So I think this is also part of the necessity to go beyond what might risk ending up being a protectionist or assistential approach to human rights offenders, into really recognizing that human rights offenders worldwide are actors, are individuals, but also movements and social organizations that are fighting today, as we are trying to do also in our specific daily activism and commitment. So I think these are the elements that I wanted to share with you, and I hope they can provide some interesting input to the conversations from now on. Thank you so much.